I'll never forget the look on his face when everyone laughed at him. That moment changed everything. It was a sunny morning at St. Helena's Academy, and as usual, the campus buzzed with chatter and privilege. I was standing with my friends, wearing my new designer heels, when the gardener walked past us, carrying a heavy bucket of soil. His shoes were old, torn, and covered in mud. "Look at that," I whispered to my friend Mia, loud enough for others to hear. "Even the plants have better footwear than him." Everyone burst out laughing. The poor man froze, his face tightening as if each laugh was a knife. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me, his eyes dark, not angry, but disappointed, and then continued walking. For a second, something inside me twisted, but I ignored it. Why should I care? I was the daughter of the school's biggest donor. I had everything: popularity, money, and influence. People respected me, or at least I thought they did. Later that day, as I sat in the cafeteria surrounded by my so-called friends, I overheard one of the teachers talking to the principal. "That's Mr. Ryan," she said softly. "He's just doing some part-time work here. Poor man lost everything in a fire last year." I tried not to listen, but the words stuck in my head like a splinter. I brushed them off, though, convincing myself he was just another unfortunate soul. The next morning, when I reached school, something felt different. Everyone was whispering and rushing toward the main gate. I followed them, curious, and what I saw made my heart stop. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce was parked right outside, gleaming under the sunlight like a mirror of power. The doors opened slowly and out stepped the gardener, but he wasn't in his muddy clothes anymore. He wore a tailored suit, polished shoes, and a calm smile that carried quiet authority. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then he looked straight at me and said, "Good morning, Miss Clara." My throat went dry. The same man I mocked yesterday was now being greeted respectfully by the headmaster himself. And that was only the beginning of the day I would never forget. Everyone stood frozen as Mr. Ryan, the gardener, handed his car keys to a valet and walked confidently toward the principal's office. The same students who used to ignore him now couldn't stop staring. Some even whispered, "Was he undercover? Is he a secret inspector?" My heart pounded in my chest, my palms cold and sweaty. I felt this strange mix of confusion and shame, but my pride wouldn't let me show it. "Maybe he's just borrowing it," Mia whispered beside me, trying to sound sure, but her voice trembled. When the principal himself came out, smiling and shaking Mr. Ryan's hand, I knew it wasn't just a dream. I couldn't stop watching as the man I'd mocked so easily was now surrounded by teachers greeting him with respect. I heard fragments of their conversation. "Welcome back, Mr. Ryan. We're honored you chose to visit us again." "Welcome back? Again?" The words didn't make sense. I followed them from a distance as they walked through the campus. He paused by the garden, the same one where I'd humiliated him. His eyes scanned the flowers, the trees, and for a moment I thought I saw sadness there. The other students kept their distance, but I couldn't. Something inside me needed to know the truth. I walked closer, trying to pretend it was just curiosity, not guilt. "Mr. Ryan?" I said hesitantly, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned, his gaze calm but unreadable. "Yes, Miss Clara." His tone wasn't rude, it was polite yet firm. The kind of tone that reminded me he remembered every word I said yesterday. I didn't know," I began, but he interrupted softly. "Didn't know what? That people's worth isn't measured by their shoes?" His words sliced through me like cold wind. I stood there, speechless, as he turned back toward the principal's office. For the rest of the morning, rumors spread like wildfire. Someone said he was a millionaire businessman visiting the school for a charity deal. Others claimed he was the owner's son who'd come to inspect how his father's donations were being used. By lunch, the truth began to unravel, and it was far more shocking than anyone expected. By lunchtime, the entire school was buzzing with speculation, and I couldn't escape the stares. Every corner I turned, someone was whispering about the man I had mocked. My stomach churned with unease as I sat alone for the first time in years. My friends had drifted to other tables, pretending they weren't part of the laughter yesterday. The cafeteria door opened, and everyone went silent again. Mr. Ryan walked in with the principal and 2 men in suits. They moved with quiet confidence, and something about the way everyone stood up told me these weren't just guests. "Students," the principal announced with a proud smile, "I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Ryan Carter, the new benefactor of St. Helena's Academy." The word benefactor echoed in my head like thunder. Benefactor? That meant he was funding the school. The same man I had laughed at was now the one keeping this place running. He gave a short speech, his voice calm but powerful. "When I lost everything last year," he began, "I took a job here to stay grounded, to remind myself what humility meant. Many of you treated me kindly. Some did not. But it showed me more about human nature than any business deal ever could." His eyes swept the room, and I swear for a second they locked with mine. I felt like the walls were closing in. My throat ached, my cheeks burned, and I wanted to disappear. When he finished, the entire hall erupted in applause, but I couldn't move. Every clap felt like a reminder of my cruelty. After the assembly, I saw him in the hallway, speaking kindly to some of the staff. The same hands that once carried soil now shook hands with power and grace. I gathered the courage to approach him again. "Mr. Ryan," I said softly, "I'm sorry for what I said yesterday. I shouldn't have." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Apologies mean little if they don't come with understanding, Clara. Think about why you said it. That's where change begins." He didn't say another word. He just walked away, leaving me standing there with tears stinging my eyes, realizing I wasn't just facing him, I was facing myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in my head. "Think about why you said it." I stared at the ceiling, wondering what made me so cruel to a man I didn't even know. Maybe it was because all my life I'd been surrounded by people who judged others by appearance and wealth. My mother always said, "We are the kind of people others look up to," and my friends fed off that same arrogance. But now that confidence felt hollow. The next morning at school, I noticed something strange. The gardeners were working near the fountain, and for the first time, I actually watched them. The sweat on their foreheads, the dirt on their hands, it wasn't something shameful. It was real, honest work. I realized I had never truly respected anyone who wasn't like me. During lunch, the principal made another announcement. Mr. Ryan had decided to sponsor a new scholarship program for underprivileged students. The irony hit me so hard I could barely breathe. He wasn't just rich, he was generous, and I had mocked him over something as meaningless as shoes. Later that afternoon, I saw him near the parking lot, talking with some teachers. The Rolls-Royce gleamed behind him, a silent reminder of how small I had been. I hesitated, but then I walked toward him. "Mr. Ryan," I said again, my voice steadier this time. "You were right. I said what I did because I thought it made me look better. But it didn't, it made me smaller." He looked at me, his eyes softer than before. "We all make mistakes, Clara. What matters is whether we let them teach us or define us." I nodded, tears welling up again. "Can I do something to make it right?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Do something kind for someone who can't repay you. That's how you start." Then he turned and left, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and redemption. For the first time, I didn't feel humiliated, I felt challenged. That night, I made a decision. I would prove that I could be better than the girl who laughed at a man for his shoes, and I had no idea that my journey to redemption was only just beginning. The following week, something inside me shifted completely. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. The janitor who arrived before sunrise. The cafeteria lady who smiled even when students ignored her. The guards who stood in the rain without complaint. It was as if Mr. Ryan's words had opened my eyes to a world I'd been blind to. I decided to start small. One morning, I brought extra sandwiches for the workers in the garden. When I handed them out, they looked surprised but grateful. One of them, an older man named Luis, said with a warm grin, "Thank you, Miss Clara. We didn't expect this from you." His tone was kind, but I could hear the hidden meaning. He remembered who I used to be. It stung, but it was fair. I deserved that. Later that day, I volunteered to help organize the new scholarship event. It felt strange at first, being around people who didn't see me as the rich, untouchable girl anymore. They treated me like an equal, and to my surprise, I liked it. Mr. Ryan occasionally visited the campus to check on the scholarship preparations, and every time he did, my heart raced. I wanted him to notice I was trying to change, not for his approval, but because I finally understood what he meant. One afternoon, he caught me helping the gardeners replant the flower beds, the same spot where I'd once mocked him. He watched quietly for a moment before saying, "You've been busy." I smiled nervously, dirt smudged on my face. "Trying to learn something new," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Growth doesn't happen in comfort, Clara. You're learning that now." His words felt like sunlight after a storm. For the first time, I saw pride in his eyes. Not the arrogant kind, but the gentle kind that meant I was doing something right. When he walked away, I felt lighter. I realized this wasn't about proving myself to anyone. It was about becoming someone I could respect. But deep down, I still didn't know who Mr. Ryan truly was. Everyone had their theories, but no one knew the full story. That truth would come soon, and it would change everything I thought I knew about him and about myself. A few days later, the principal announced a special assembly where Mr. Ryan would share his life story with the entire school. The auditorium was packed, students whispering and speculating again, but this time there was no laughter. There was respect. When he walked onto the stage, dressed simply but elegantly, the room fell silent. He began speaking in that calm, steady voice that always carried weight. "I wasn't born rich," he said. "In fact, I used to mow lawns for this very school when I was your age." Gasps spread across the crowd. "My father was a gardener here, and I worked with him every summer. We didn't have much, but he always said something that stayed with me. A man's worth isn't in what he wears, but in what he gives." His eyes glistened slightly as he continued. "Years later, I started a small landscaping company. We struggled at first, but I worked hard, learned from failure, and built trust. Eventually, that business grew into one of the biggest property design firms in the city. Everything was going perfectly until last year when a fire destroyed my main office. I lost millions overnight. I came back here to remind myself where I started to rebuild from the ground again." The crowd was silent, hanging onto every word. I felt tears forming as his story unfolded. "When I worked here as a gardener," he said softly, "some of you smiled at me, some ignored me, and some mocked me. But that didn't anger me, it taught me. It reminded me how quickly people forget that circumstances can change, but character lasts forever." My heart felt heavy with guilt and admiration all at once. I realized how small my world had been, how shallow my values were. He looked out at the crowd one last time. "If you take anything from my story," he said, "let it be this. Never measure a person's worth by what they wear or what they own. Life can humble anyone, and it can also lift anyone." When the applause erupted, it wasn't the kind that fades quickly. It was the kind that carried meaning. And for me, sitting there in tears, it was the day I promised I would never judge anyone the same way again. After the assembly ended, everyone left the hall buzzing with admiration, but I stayed behind, unable to move. His story had pierced straight through me. The same man I had laughed at now stood as the perfect embodiment of resilience, humility, and strength. I watched as he stepped down from the stage, greeting a few students and teachers with that same calm smile. My heart thumped painfully in my chest. I knew I couldn't leave without saying something more. I walked toward him slowly, every step heavy with guilt and courage. "Mr. Ryan," I said softly when I finally reached him. He turned, his expression kind but composed. "Clara," he greeted me. "You listened closely today." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I did, and I finally understand what you meant that day. You were teaching me something I didn't know I needed to learn." For a moment, he studied me silently, then said, "Life has its way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it. The question is, will we remember them when no one is watching?" I felt my throat tighten. "I will," I whispered. "I promise I will." He smiled faintly, not as someone forgiving a wrongdoer, but as someone recognizing a spark of change. "Good," he said simply. Then something good came out of that moment. His words lifted a weight I had been carrying for days. "Mr. Ryan," I said hesitantly, "if it's not too personal, why did you come back to this school instead of rebuilding somewhere else?" His eyes softened with a faraway look. "Because this place reminds me of where I started. I wanted to remember humility before success found me again." I stood there, silent, overwhelmed by the simplicity and depth of his answer. As he left, surrounded by teachers thanking him for his speech, I realized that people like him didn't just inspire, they transformed others through their example. That night, when I returned home, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized myself. The girl who once found power in mocking others was gone. What stared back was someone who had been humbled, awakened, and changed. But what I didn't know was that life wasn't done testing how real that change truly was. The test came sooner than I expected. A week after Mr. Ryan's speech, our school hosted a charity event to raise funds for the new scholarship program. I volunteered to help organize it, determined to prove my change was more than words. Everything was going smoothly until the day of the event, when a sudden downpour ruined half of the outdoor setup. Tents collapsed, decorations soaked, and everyone started panicking. Some students blamed the maintenance team for not preparing enough. The same kind of mocking laughter and complaints I used to join in filled the air again. For a brief moment, I felt that familiar temptation to stay quiet, to blend in, to let others take the blame. But then I saw the gardeners rushing through the rain, trying to salvage what they could, their uniforms drenched. Without thinking, I grabbed a few plastic sheets and ran to help them. "Clara, what are you doing?" Mia shouted from the covered area, shocked. "You'll ruin your dress." I just smiled through the rain. "It's just fabric. It'll dry." We worked together for hours, securing tables, carrying boxes, wiping chairs. My hands were muddy, my hair a mess, but I didn't care. When the storm finally eased, the place looked decent enough for the event to continue. As I stood catching my breath, I noticed Mr. Ryan watching from a distance. He didn't say a word, just gave me a small nod of acknowledgement. That single gesture meant more than any praise could. Later, when guests began arriving, I overheard some parents whispering about that gardener-turned-millionaire, and the spoiled girl who embarrassed herself helping the workers. Their words stung, but I didn't let them stop me. For the first time, I didn't care about appearances. When the event ended successfully, Mr. Ryan came up to me and said quietly, "Now you understand. True worth isn't about how you look when life is easy. It's about who you are when things fall apart." I smiled, rain-soaked and tired but proud. "I understand now," I said, and for the first time I truly meant it. But I still didn't know that Mr. Ryan had one last surprise that would change how everyone saw him and me forever. The surprise came at the end of the event, when the principal took the stage to thank everyone. The lights dimmed, the crowd quieted, and he gestured toward Mr. Ryan, who stood near the front with his calm, composed smile. "Before we close," the principal announced, "Mr. Ryan has a very special message and gift to share." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Mr. Ryan walked up to the microphone, his presence commanding yet humble. "This event was never about showing generosity," he began. "It was about building empathy, I came back to this school to see if kindness still existed among privilege. His gaze swept over the students, resting on me for a brief moment before moving on. And today, he continued, I saw something that reminded me why I chose to invest here, not in buildings, but in people. He paused and nodded toward me. Miss Clara, would you join me on stage? My heart dropped. The audience turned to look, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. My legs trembled as I walked up under the bright lights, my heart pounding in my chest. When I stood beside him, he said, This young lady reminded me that true change is possible. She made a mistake, but she chose to face it, to grow, and to act differently when given the chance. That's courage. The crowd fell silent. My eyes burned with tears, and I could barely look at him. I once wore torn shoes and carried soil through these halls, he said. Today, I stand here because someone once believed in giving me a second chance. And now, I'm passing that on. He turned to me with a soft smile. Clara, I'd like to name the first scholarship under this program after your father, the man who first donated to this academy and gave workers like my father a place to belong. The room erupted in applause. I was speechless, overwhelmed. Thank you, I whispered, my voice cracking. I don't deserve this. Maybe not yesterday, he said gently. But today, you do. Those words broke something open inside me. For the first time, I felt seen not for what I owned, but for who I was becoming, and that moment changed me forever. That night, after the event ended and the crowd had gone home, I stood outside the school gates staring at the empty parking lot where the Rolls-Royce had been. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of rain and flowers from the garden. My heart felt full yet heavy at the same time. Everything had changed so quickly. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who laughed without thinking, who believed money defined value, and I almost didn't recognize her anymore. Mr. Ryan's kindness had done something no punishment ever could. It had forced me to look inward. The next morning, I arrived at school early, determined to start fresh. I found the gardeners already at work, trimming the bushes, sweeping the walkways. I smiled and greeted them, something I'd never done before. Need any help today? I asked, and they laughed warmly, handing me a small pair of gloves. As I worked beside them, I felt a strange peace I hadn't felt in years. Each shovel of dirt, each flower planted, felt like a quiet apology to the world I'd once looked down upon. Later that afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Mr. Ryan. Inside, he wrote, Clara, I'm leaving for a new project overseas, but I wanted to thank you. You reminded me that no matter how many times life humbles us, we can always rise stronger, continue to be the change others don't expect. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was faith. Months passed, and I became one of the first students to help run the scholarship fund. Every time a new student joined through that program, I remembered the day I mocked a gardener and learned the meaning of true worth. And whenever I saw someone being judged for what they wore or what they owned, I stepped in, because I knew better now. Years later, when I stood at the same school as a guest speaker, I shared my story, the laughter, the shame, the change. The students listened quietly, their faces thoughtful. I ended my speech with the same words Mr. Ryan once told me. Never measure someone by their shoes because you don't know the roads they've walked.